Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ivy Poole. I'm the Newcastle Town Supervisor. We're happy to have you here this evening for the second listening session for the Newcastle Council on Race and Equity. I'm joined here tonight by several of the town board members, Jason Lichtenthal, Lauren Levin, Jeremy Saland, and Lisa Katz, who join me in their enthusiasm for this work. And of course, we're also joined by our co-hosts and co-chairs for this evening's activities and for the work of the council, Michelle Maynard-Elliott and Zabine Mirza. We could not have hoped for two better and more talented managers and co-chairs, and you'll see that on display tonight as they facilitate the second listening session. I'm so proud of the work that has started and that we are doing here in this town to really address the systemic racism and the history thereof that has existed not only nationally, because we recognize we're part of the national movement that is occurring around taking a good hard look at these questions, but we're also, of course, very focused on what we can do locally, understanding our history, our place therein, and thinking about how can we make real change in our community to become the kind of community that we all really want to live in. So that said, I'm not going to go in too much to my own views on this subject, because really the purpose of tonight is to hear from all of you. What we have done is we have taken 4 work groups. There are a total of 8 work groups working on the Council on Race and Equity. We've taken 4 topic areas that we will be discussing this evening: housing and planning, community outreach, town administration, and communications. Each one of those will be broken into a 20-minute segment. And really the purpose of this particular session is to listen for me and to hear from all of you, to hear from the community, your thoughts on how we go from where we are today to where we want to be. Recognizing that standing up and saying, as we have said, and as we will continue to say, that Black Lives Matter is important, but it is only the first step in what folks have said could be considered a 12-step process to getting from where we are to where we want to be. So now that we've taken that first step, and we will continue to affirm that Black Lives Matter, how do we then take the second step? How do we get to a place where we have an action plan for our community with specific initiatives that will begin to make a real difference here in our community? And that's what this council is all about. That's what their charge is to figure out what needs to be a part of that action plan. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Maynard-Elliott and Zabine Mirza, who will tell you more about the purpose and the structure of this evening's listening session. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ivy. Really enjoyed last night's session, and I'm looking forward to tonight. I will do just a brief introduction for those of you who haven't heard this 6 times already. Zabine will do the same, and then we'll come back over and start our discussion about the topics. So for those of you who don't know me, my family moved here to Chappaqua in 1978. I attended Roaring Brook and Bell School and Horace Greeley, went away to college and law school, and came back to the community about 12 years ago to raise our children. I have a graduated senior and a rising junior at the high school. And professionally, I'm a lawyer by training. I spent some years in big law in New York City, and then in-house at an industrial gases company. While at that place, I moved from the business side of mergers and acquisitions to from the legal side to the business side, where I did mergers and acquisitions negotiations. And I am presently the independent director of a publicly traded specialty chemicals company. On a personal level, I'm just really excited to be a part of this and a part of bringing about change in our community. And I've enjoyed the time that I've had thus far, and really looking forward to continue the work. Zabine?
Thanks, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us, many of you again, for the second night, and welcome to everyone that's here for the first night. Again, for those of you that haven't heard from me before, my name is Zabine Mirza. I live here in Chappaqua with my husband and 2 young children, one of whom is scheduled to begin kindergarten next year at West Orchard, and I am due with my third in 3 weeks. I am a Brooklyn native, born and raised, not a transplant. I've lived internationally. I spent the last 10 years in Dubai, where I am professionally a negotiator for the government, and I was negotiator for the Prime Minister's office there. My background is in investment banking, management consulting. Currently, I serve as managing director of the Schreiner Institute, which is an international negotiation authority. I'm really excited to hear from all of you here today. And we're looking forward to another very productive evening. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sabine. So we'll follow the same format as last night. We will go back and forth. The first topic for this evening is housing and planning. And we sent out a couple of prompt questions that we wanted everyone to be thinking about as they came to this meeting this evening with ideas and suggestions about how these topics should be tackled. So I will read first the purpose of the Housing and Planning Group. It is the evaluation of current housing and planning policies and projects to determine if and how they should be revised to meet the CRE goals of promoting racial equity, inclusion, and harmony. The creation of CRE guidelines for the assessment of future projects that would cover this area as well. So the questions we sent out for your consideration were, what factors regarding racial equity and inclusion should be applied when considering proposed residential and commercial projects for approval? Can our current zoning laws or other housing and planning policies be improved upon to support BIPOC residents and encourage diversity? Does the town currently foster or discourage integration? And how can we better promote community integration in Newcastle? So we'd love to hear your comments.
Okay, for anyone who wasn't here last night, the way it'll work is to speak, just raise your digital hand and I will open the line. And Ed Frank is our first person raising his hand. So Ed, I'm going to open the line. Okay, Ed, we should be able to hear you. Oh, you might have to unmute yourself. Sorry about that. Ed, you definitely have to unmute yourself. It should be in the lower left-hand corner on the microphone symbol. We'll have a red line.
Okay, I got it. I got it.
Okay, gotcha.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you folks for what you're doing here. I think it's very important. For those of you who don't know me, I've been involved in the Conifer project between the highway and the railroad tracks going back to 2012. A member of the Chappaqua for Responsible Affordable Housing Group. You know what I find ironic is that this project was approved by Mr. James E. Johnson, who was the Westchester County housing monitor. He himself is a person of color. So what I'm thinking is it's not only what you folks are trying to do here in this town, there are external forces putting pressure on the town to do certain things. And also what's ironic is that Mr. Johnson put out a set of guidelines for what's an acceptable site and what's not an acceptable site for affordable housing. And the Conifer project is a low-income project that's required to be affirmatively marketed to low-income families. And he originally said the site is not satisfactory. Then suddenly, I guess pressure was put on him and he flip-flopped. And that's why this project has proceeded. So I think it's very unfortunate that, in my opinion, in other people's opinion, this is a case of systemic racism and people being redlined and being steered to a site like that. What I did and what other responsible civic-minded citizens did was to say, hey, let's not build that, or if we build it, we'll put it over where the town hall and police station is. And a local resident architect created site plans for where it could be. But that never happened, and the reasons that it didn't happen were unfounded, wrong reasons. The other thing we suggested is don't build anything like that. Let's take the money, which a lot of it is taxpayer money, and let's buy condominiums or reasonably priced homes and actually give it to these families to live in and be part of our community. That did not happen. So let me tell you, there was a lot of political pressure, and I think that something like this should never have been built, and in the future should never have been built. And you mentioned zoning. Well, let me tell you that Mr. Johnson said, and it's all in writing, of course, there is no exclusionary zoning in Newcastle. Newcastle passes the Berenson criteria and the Huntington criteria. So in the future, there should never be anything like this. It's unsafe. Children who live there that go to the Bell School, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that they're not going to run across the 3-lane Route 120 Quaker Road to take the shortest route. There's going to be a 6-foot opening in the stone parapet wall. There are times when there's glare of the sun, and if there's ever an accident and a car goes through that opening, that's a problem. The other problem is at the foot of the off-ramp, where maybe people will be crossing over there. DOT will not allow a stoplight there. So that is another dangerous location. So, and not to even mention that the site itself was a contaminated brownfield. And in fact, if you look into the purpose of New York State brownfield, you'll find that taxpayer money was supposed to be used to decontaminate brownfields in blighted areas. I don't think Chappaqua is a blighted area. There's just so much wrong with that site. And I feel that the people who will be living there are being utilized as dispensable pawns in a political struggle. So on the positive side, I happen to be a fire commissioner in the Newcastle Fire District #1, and I would suggest that people who move in there consider joining the fire department. We're all volunteers. This would make them feel like they're part of the community. We could use more volunteers. They could also volunteer for the Chappaqua Volunteer Ambulance Corps. So I would like to see these people become part of the community. So that's how I see this.
Ed, thank you. I appreciate your comments. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just said thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. And we do have members of our housing and planning work group that are listening in. So we've made note of the concerns that you raise, and we will certainly have our group address them. But appreciate that information. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, and good luck to the committee.
Thank you.
Our next person is Bill Spade. Your microphone should be open.
Yeah, do you hear me?
We hear you, Bill.
Wonderful. Thank you for the time and your efforts so far. And unfortunately, we couldn't join the meeting last night, but would love to hear more about all the other things that are going on. As a short introduction, myself and my partner Keiko are architects here in Chappaqua. We've lived here since 1990 and been practicing in the area, architectural practice since 1994. Pardon me. And sorry, and have been involved particularly maybe over the last 10 or so plus years with advocating affordable housing where where the opportunities have come up. Ed and Frank mentioned about the Conifer project, and I was involved with Ed on the efforts that we were trying to make to essentially relocate that project. And we've been involved in other efforts in the town to advocate for affordable housing, senior affordable housing, and maybe as a summary of all that experience, know well that there's a great resistance in the town to affordable housing. And much of the resistance stems from, on the surface at least, from an economic argument to say that affordable housing reduces property values, and yet the clear outcome of our town to date is that it's a very homogeneous town, and we think that that's the result of these concerted efforts to keep out any other type of housing. I wanted to throw out some statistics that I don't know if you all have sort of gone into the data of some of the statistics about our town, but some that make that help feed our passion for why we need affordable housing as a way to create a more diverse community. And these are some statistics from the 2017 comprehensive plan. We have approximately 15,000 acres of land in the town of Newcastle. Amazingly, approximately 14,500 of that acreage, 96.7%, is single family property. So right from the get-go, the opportunity to live in this community is significantly weighted toward those who can afford a single family home. There are 6,000 housing units in town, and only 10% of those are any kind of multifamily housing. You may well know that the median single family home price in the town of Newcastle is $879,000. So based purely on land use, that restricts the ability to live in this town to only those who are economically successful. And we would certainly argue that the systemic racism, in part, that carries through is an economic segregation, and saying that, well, if you are economically successful, you can afford to live in our town. And if you're not economically successful, can't afford a single family home, well, that's too bad. And so we feel passionately about changing that dynamic and creating a more diverse housing opportunities to create a more diverse community. Speaking of diverse community, you may also know that as of the 2019 demographics, there are approximately 17,500 residents in the town of Newcastle. 87.2% of those residents are white, 1.6% are Black, 3.9% are Hispanic, and I failed to write in the Asian population number. I think it's around 5%. That's as compared to in our county, and maybe specifically on certain categories here, the county right around us is 68% white, again, where we're 87% white. The New York metropolitan area is 43% white. And again, we are 87% white. So things are happening in this community that prevent a more diverse population from living here. And we certainly believe that the housing stock and the limitation on single family housing is helping to reinforce that. Interestingly, Ed mentioned the Berenson case. Berenson case is a well-known land use case that is actually based here in Chappaqua. A developer sued the town because it was not permitting multifamily housing in the town, and ultimately went to the, I believe, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in Berenson's favor. And I believe that was the Old Farm Lakes subdivision or town home development off Route 117 was the first multifamily development in the town of Newcastle. That was, the case was decided in 1979, and that development was built, I think, in the early 80s. There were, I believe, 2 or 3 other multifamily developments built in the town. But as of right now, those are the only multifamily zoned properties in town. And based on the statistics I cited earlier, we still are not solving the problem of the lack of multifamily and diverse housing in this community. And I feel strongly that we have still not addressed the legacy of the Berenson case, which was that our community was trying to prevent multifamily housing from being built in the community. And it took the courts to change that. Then, beyond that, I would say we are actively involved with the form-based code committee for changing the downtown zoning. That proposed zoning has a provision for a 10% affordable housing requirement for all new developments under that zoning. So we certainly concur that that's a step in the right direction. We would certainly support and advocate other concepts that would create more diverse housing and a more diverse population. Maybe that's enough for the moment, and we're very interested in being actively involved. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate your comments. And we, again, will take them up with the committee, understand the issues around economic segregation and also the issues around that our residents have a concern about reduction in property values. So we're looking to the appropriate way to address that. We understand this is a pretty heavy topic. But we do want to create more diverse housing opportunities. So we will make an effort to look at that with the team. And I just want to remind folks, I really appreciate all the information we're getting. We just have these 20-minute time slots. We said we weren't going to cut people off, but please just be mindful that other people may have some questions. I think we've got a couple more questions in this topic, and then we're going to have to move on. So next question, please. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Geetha.
Yes.
Your line is open?
Yep, got it. So this is coming from a town resident who was on the other end, so on the other side. So when we moved to the town in 2006, we lived in Thornwood, which is like 3 miles from here. But still, when we were looking for, again, not an independent house, but a multifamily location. We never thought that Chappaqua would be a town that we would come and live in. We looked at every other town in the neighborhood, but not Chappaqua, because there is this idea outside that if you have to own a property or own even a condo in Chappaqua, you have to be a millionaire. So we did not, and we just happened to look at this in the last moment, like a week before school started. So we just happened to land here in Chappaqua, which was not our original intention, but we are happy. But what I'm trying to say is the general idea outside is, yes, middle income people cannot afford to live in Chappaqua. And I think that needs to change. And the resources that are available, like when you go to the town's website or any place as a real estate, when we are looking for a place, it also, again, the whole committee, that's part of what we're going to do, is to provide some information about the percentage and try to increase the percentage of BIPOC residents in the town, because when you are looking for a town to live in, and if it is like close to 90% white, then others hesitate to come in. So that is just like 2 major points, which is something which affected our decision when we decided to move here in 2006. And I'm sure there are other families who feel the same way too.
Yeah, thank you, Geetha. Those are great comments, right? It's not only the reality of the folks who are able to afford to live here, but it's the perception and how we market or don't market our community that may cause people to decide that they're not even willing to look at our place as a place to live and a place that would be inclusive. So we absolutely need to address those, including information on the town website that makes it look like it's more inclusive. So thank you for that, Geetha.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have Victoria Elzupidi. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Victoria. Yes.
Hi, greetings. Thank you for doing the second night. It was really interesting participating yesterday evening, and the conversation tonight. I just wanted to kind of build on some of the comments that people made around, I guess I truly appreciate the economic diversity points that were made earlier, and I just want to kind of caution us to not equate racial equity as synonymous with economic equity. And, I think certainly it is a very important thing to have an array of types of housing and more affordable housing, big proponent of that, and it's very important. But my experience personally, and even, with friends and colleagues who are African-American, specifically African-American, who are, middle class, upper middle class, very successful professionals. I remember even when I first moved here, I'm from Brooklyn originally, but moved here in 2008, and was, encouraging friends who were looking to move outside of the city to come up here. And I repeatedly would hear from them that this Chappaqua was not an option. I don't mean to overgeneralize, but some of the names of towns that came up were some of the more affluent communities or neighborhoods within White Plains or Montclair, New Jersey, places that, again, reputationally, culturally, that feel more inclusive, that have the reputation of being more inclusive and diverse, racially diverse, ethnically diverse, and that even though Chappaqua has, historic reputation around, being a beautiful place with excellent schools, it really was not even an option for a lot of African-American folks to come here and to raise their children here. And so, since moving here, I have met a number of folks who are African-American, but it always occurs to me, what can we do to really think about a cultural shift? And I know that's a lot about what this whole initiative is, which is wonderful. But I just wanted to put out there, maybe it might be worthwhile almost looking at some of those other communities as case studies. What's working there, what makes those places more inclusive, that we might use as best practices and model after. And, even do it, I don't know who might be willing to participate, but even focus groups with folks of color here in our community and beyond, to kind of hear what's important, so that that can be embedded into everything we're doing with this initiative, but with housing, as well. What makes a neighborhood, quote unquote, feel more welcoming? What makes it feel like it's a non-exclusionary community, that you don't have to be part of the inside track? So just different ways to kind of really be intentional about creating a climate and a culture that is truly welcoming and truly inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely great points, Victoria. And we've noted those that economic equity and racial equity are not the equivalent, and that it's important to understand that we want diversity from all socioeconomic levels, racial diversity, right? And that we should check other communities for best practices. I certainly agree with you. I know successful African-American families who live here in this community who won't put their kids in the schools, which is the craziest thing to me, because we're here for the schools, or that's one of the main reasons, right? But because they feel that this is not an inclusive environment, it's not a place that they want to put their kids. So they'll live here, but they'll send their kids to private schools, just as an example. So definitely another topic that we'll share with the team. I know that there might have been another question or two, but I think we've run out of time on this. So we will put up the slide at the end. So if anybody has additional questions with respect to town and planning, please send your emails, and we will send that information out to the town and planning, the Housing and Planning Committee. So switching over to you, Zabine. Thanks.
Thank you, Nichelle. Thanks, everybody. So we're moving on to the next topic, which is community outreach. And this is something that I think piggybacks a little bit onto some of the discussion we've had about housing and planning. And community outreach was really a work group built around thinking on how we can establish effective ways to welcome, integrate, and support new residents, families of Newcastle from all racial, all ethnic, all socioeconomic backgrounds. So if we were to develop an inclusive welcome wagon, so to speak, what would that look like? So some questions we put forth to ask you to consider, and I ask you to consider now: how can we properly welcome all new families to make sure they feel embraced in our community? When your family, when you moved to Chappaqua, how were you welcomed into the community? What do you feel was missing from or off-putting within the welcome efforts when you moved? What resources, supports were most helpful to you in your transition to the community? What resources would you have liked to see offered that weren't? What is the best way to know about or reach people in the community who might be struggling, right? They've moved and they're struggling. They don't know who to reach out to, how to really maneuver the town. And then the last thing I'd ask you to consider is that, are there any BIPOC specific welcome initiatives that we should be considering? So with that, I open the floor and I ask you for your ideas.
If anyone is interested in speaking, just raise your digital hand. Okay, Joanna Nair, I'm going to open your line right now. You just need to unmute yourself.
Good evening, everyone. It's Joanna. Thanks for doing the second session, and I appreciate it. So I heard Ed and Bill speak, and it was really enlightening and to hear from them and their points of view. And now I just want to talk about, this community outreach part of the program, because the metrics provided by Bill and the percentage of people living over here compared to what we are trying to do, we aren't comparing apples to apples, number one. And number two, we have two huge issues on our hands. One is the current Black Lives Matter movement, and integrating with this income housing, which I'm trying to find a nice way of putting it up, this income housing which we are building. And is Chappaqua ready to be the next change, which people can look up to and say, they did it? And what did we do that, we can be proud of? So I think we really need to introspect and, think about this, because we're taking on a lot of responsibility. It's human lives we are dealing with at the end of the day. And, we can't afford to have children go to schools when there's fear of them not being treated equally, or people go to work, and et cetera, et cetera. So I just think, it's not only us who are listening, but it's the whole town which needs to do a little introspection and say, are we ready for this? Because, I wouldn't want to live here and know that someone new is coming in and not being welcomed with a huge, big heart. I mean, that's all I want to say, really.
Thank you, Johanna. And I think that's really important. And one of the things that you mentioned is very critical. Are we ready as a town? And the question that I would ask to all of you is, do you think we're ready, right? How can we get ready? How can we be ready? These are people's lives. They're not just statistics, right? These statistics represent humans that we are trying to get to come here and live here, whose kids are going to go to school. Will they be discriminated against because of where they live or their families? And we ask you, are we ready? How can we get ready? And again, some of the questions that I ask you to please raise your hand, share an experience is, what can we do better? How should we be welcoming these families into our community when they get here?
Please, if anybody else is interested in speaking, just raise your digital hand. Okay, we have Victoria. I'm going to open your line. Okay, just unmute.
Okay, hi again.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi. So just to get the ball rolling a little, I mean, at the very least to, in light of the comments that were already made, to have some very intentional events. I think in general in our community, my experience, I moved here in 2008, is that there really are very few of those in general, overall. And so I almost wish or hope maybe we can come up with almost like an annual calendar of events that have a welcoming tone to them, that have almost, talk about inclusion, that are geared towards the entire community, including the new folks who are moving into Hunt's Place. And, almost, it's a very sensitive, right, sociological, psychological, this is their new home. We want them to not feel that they're on display and that there's something other than, I heard the terms earlier and I know it wasn't intended this way, but, these people, I think it's important, the semantics that we use and almost put ourselves in their shoes on an empathy level. How would it feel? We've all at different times in our lives, felt that maybe we were entering a new community, a new circumstance, a new situation. And so, to kind of craft some welcome events, whether, different activities at the park or downtown that have a flavor to them of an opportunity to learn what happens in our town, or here, I don't mean to sound so technical in terms of orientation, but, really kind of sitting down and mapping out what might be some fun ways to bring kids together, to bring adults together. I don't want to be so formulaic as to say like buddy systems. I mean, it sounds so artificial, but just very intentional, knowing that the objective is to have people feel more comfortable, to feel part of the community, contributors to the community, et cetera. A warmth, I suppose, is really what I'm feeling in my heart of, just creating opportunities to learn more about the town and what's out here and how to get involved. Here are some committees you might join, volunteer opportunities, what's out there. And it's almost like building even around Community Day. We know we have this wonderful, I think one of our most successful events in the town each year is Community Day. So almost thinking in that, thinking of the array of informational points that we have there that could be, part of some welcome piece and even beyond that. And actually, I'm also thinking in terms of maybe there are some new committees that people can participate in, that their voices are immediately included in the future of the town, so that it's not just a superficial, but they're not to pressure them. Again, it's that very fine balance of having it be on each person's own terms of how they want to get it. Some people may not want to be involved, but at least to offer opportunities for them to kind of connect with other people who live here and be part of Newcastle.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I think all of those points are extremely valid, intentional events. I love that. I think it's absolutely important, and not just for the Hunts Place residents, but for all people of color, Black and non-Black POC that come to this town that do feel kind of like they live on the edges and on the outskirts. We never want that to be, any residents, any person's experience. I love the idea as well of immediately giving them a place and a voice on a new committee, and some way for them to immediately get involved. You don't have to be here for 50 years and have a legacy. I mean, we want to create safe places, and there needs to be more safe places. And I appreciate your feedback. Thank you so much, Victoria.
Okay, Yvonne Cognac, I'm going to open your line. You just need to unmute yourself.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yep, hi, Yvonne.
Okay, hello again. I was yesterday here, but maybe perhaps one of the ideas could be, I don't know, through the different PTAs or through the town, but there could be a group of volunteers, families who are happy to welcome newcomers and show them around, and making sure that, again, not a buddy system, but volunteers that want to be available for newcomers and be able to include other people in the town or show them
Mhm.
around.
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea. Many times the way we meet other people in town is through our kids, right? The parents of other kids and kids that go to school with our own. Absolutely. And integrating with the PTA, with schools, and securing volunteers who are excited about this kind of work absolutely would be,
Yeah.
I think, fantastic.
If you have children who are in high school, then that tends to be more difficult because yes, you go to baby groups or play dates, but then high school, then you don't have that kind of
Right.
those kind of groups. So maybe they're having some volunteers to help other people.
Noted. Thank you very much, Yvonne. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, Geetha Nathan, I'm going to open your line. And just unmute yourself. You're all set.
Yep, I got it. Thank you. So a couple of things. I think we are talking about inviting more new, like diverse residents into the community. I think one way to get that done is to first make sure that the residents who are already here feel comfortable being here. So I think when the current residents are happy and comfortable being here, then I think that word, just spreading that word will get more people in. We should also focus on the current residents before we focus on bringing new people in here. That is just one of my points. The other one, any other meetings or organizations that we have, for example, PTA, this is just coming from my experience. It should be inclusive in a way that these events and planning should happen in a way that people can actually attend. Because I moved here when my daughter was in middle school, the PTA meetings always happen during the day, which I, as a working mom, I cannot attend during the day. So those things have to be considered. Not everybody can attend meetings during the day. So I think different options, different meeting times, different groups, I think that would make more people attend all these meetings and anything, even with school or with town, anything for everything. Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Geetha. Absolutely, and that's something that we've all talked about. When you're a working parent, how difficult it is to get involved in a community that sometimes doesn't recognize that. And like you said, you want to be involved but can't because of timing and work and other obligations. So thank you very much for bringing that up. That's a very important point.
Okay, next we have Joshua Hermit.
Yeah, great. So just a suggestion on maybe another significant opportunity that's sort of a signature event for the town with the book fair. My family's gone for a number of years in a row, and unfortunately, I think one of the things that we've observed is while there are diverse authors that are there, to us it seems like they have a dearth of people that are visiting their booths, unfortunately. And I think it's an opportunity in a sense, in a number of different categories. So one, it brings a heck of a lot of people from not just our town, but neighboring towns to the community. So an opportunity to show that we are taking action in this area. Two, I think it's certainly a category that our own family is talking about on a very consistent basis, especially now in terms of how do we talk about race with our kids, and leveraging people that are writing books for kids. And my wife is certainly informed me of some of the research from an academic perspective about kids having the ability to associate race beginning at the age of 2 or even younger. I also think it ties into a theme that we heard on one of the most recent school board meetings, which is that there's $30,000 that's being allocated to have a more diverse library, especially in I believe the younger schools across the community here. What does that look like? Is there a way to essentially support people that have made an effort in their own right to attend our book fair and talk about the books that they've written in recent years of the book fair itself. And then I guess a final couple things would be, do they have ideas, or can we put forward ideas in terms of using the book fair as a way to perhaps suggest ways that families, especially where there is perhaps a significant opportunity here, and that gap is present, to have that conversation. So what does it sound like What does it look like? What's been successful in those types of discussions? And then finally, I think one of the other things that struck us from the recent school board meeting was the idea that I think there are a number of consultants that are going to be working with the schools and engaging with faculty. And I know that there are differing views in terms of, is enough currently being done? Is there an opportunity to do a lot more? But I think just tying into some of that idea of, if there is kind of a framework or some ideas that we can put forward through the book fair, are those same lessons perhaps being linked over to teachers that teach in our schools and are essentially having that day-to-day interaction with the kids that we have in our town.
Yeah.
And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh. And I think all your points are very valid. You asked, can we put forth ideas? The answer is always yes. Please share with us your ideas on how we can leverage not just the book fair, but some of the very high-profile events that we have around town that attract people and visitors from other places, from the city, from other states even, and how we can utilize that as a means to, broaden the dialogue about diversity and racial equity in Chappaqua. Your points about, the consultants, the libraries, diversifying access to literature and resources, even for younger children, all very important, all very critical, and certainly all things tying back to the fact that we're talking about community outreach, all things that people are looking at when they are assessing whether or not this is the place for them to move with their families. So thank you very much for that. If anyone else has a question, Carrie, do we have time for one more, or are we at our 20-minute mark?
We have one more person, Steffi Shen. I'm going to open your line.
Hi, Steffi.
Hi. So this was just a brief idea that I had, but maybe to increase inclusion and socialization within the community, we could, I don't know if we could use a Maine, Westchester, or Chappaqua website where we clearly organize different communities and organizations. Like, for example, the Chappaqua moms who have this kind of interest in knitting or gardening, something like a cumulative list of where all the communities are would just be a great starting point, I'd imagine, for somebody who's new to the community. So yeah. I don't know.
I think that's a great idea, and like a directory of sorts for anyone that's new to town that they can find an interest. I know we do have something similar, but perhaps we have to look at maybe centralizing it and promoting it a little bit more with an eye to inclusivity and to new residents as well. Thank you very much, Steffi. Thank you for your suggestion. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. Again, if any of you think of something after this, we are going to put up a slide with all of our emails. Please feel free to share your questions and to send us any other suggestions. So Nichelle, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Sabine. The next topic is town administration. And this is the focus of this group is to have a review of current policies and establishment of new policies to promote diversity and inclusion at the town administration level and to encourage BIPOC resident participation in civic activities. And some of the questions we asked you to consider are, if you are familiar with diversity initiatives implemented in your place of business, what are they and which do you believe have been the most effective and why? And how has success been measured? What are the barriers that keep residents from participating in civic activities? What personal and professional actions do you think our town administration and leaders can undertake to demonstrate their commitment to inclusion? How can the town administration demonstrate support for victims of bias incidents? And what practices can be employed to attract and retain qualified and diverse talent to serve on our town board and as administrative appointments? So if anyone has any suggestions or ideas, we'd love to hear those.
Again, any comments? Just please raise your digital hand. Okay, Geetha, I'm going to open up your line. Okay.
Thank you. I didn't expect to talk so much today, but here it is. Because I think you mentioned that if we tried anything in our place of work and if that can be useful to share. And I got involved in this whole the committee and this whole agenda because of what started at work for me. So that's why I wanted to share this. One, again, I work for a nonprofit where we represent all the independent bookstores in the country. And we are trying, our association is trying to bring more diverse members of the board. That has been an ongoing topic for us, trying to find it. Again, one of the things that we are trying to do now, maybe it would help, is because many people are not sure what it involves to be on the board. So maybe educating them, having a mentor, like showing them what that responsibility means. And sometimes they just need to talk. People who are new to this, they just need to talk to somebody so they get more information about it. And next, providing a safe place for BIPOC members to gather, and maybe a safe place that can be organized and run by the town. So that gives it more validity. And the website has to show that the town is behind BIPOC diversity and racial diversity. Currently, our website has no information about it. I think it has to start. Somebody is searching for Newcastle. We get to the website, but there is nothing on the website that talks anything about diversity. And it also would help to have diverse board members. And the last one is training. If we can have some kind of an education for a member, for the community, for students, for teachers, and just residents, and also people in the administration, any kind of training that is run by professionals. I think those are some of the things that we have been trying at our work.
Great, Geetha, thanks a lot. So what I'm hearing is education about what it means to be on the town board. So many of us may live here, but may have not been involved to date. So really don't understand what the responsibility is or what the time commitment is. So if we could understand more about that, that might encourage more people to participate. Create a safe space for BIPOC to gather that is supported by the town. Look at the website and determine if the town website is a place where diversity is promoted or not, and what changes can we make so that BIPOC members of our community will be involved or interested in town activities. And finally, training. You mentioned education for our members, our students, our administration about how to attract, retain diverse talent and people who can contribute to our town board.
Yeah, training just to how to deal with it, because many people have questions and sometimes they don't know if they're asking the right questions, and they are reluctant to ask the questions because they're worried that they may make a mistake. But sometimes it's okay to make a mistake, and that's what this training would teach them.
Sure. Thank you, Keith. I appreciate that.
Okay, Hermaine Charles, I'm going to open up your line. Just need to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi,
I'm
Hermaine.
Charles. Thanks for having me here. I wanted to say, as far as the tongue administration, I think Chappaqua is really nicely poised to be a leader. We should strive to become an example of how racial equity can be adopted. One of the ways I think we can do that would be to have an administrative appointment, almost create an office of human rights, race, and equity within the town hall. And a lot of the things we're doing right now on the Council of Racial Equity, we're fired up. We have great ideas. We have a great team and phenomenal momentum going into this. I think long term, though, there is place for a full-time office with 1 or 2 or 3 people. And the Council of Racial Equity could almost function as a steering committee for that office. And we have so many great ideas coming from the last 2 nights. A lot of the implementation could be done through that office and supported by our volunteer body. So that's my major point. There is one thing I want to highlight and reiterate coming from Victoria Alzapetti, and she pointed out that throughout the conversation, there seemed to be, we're using Blacks, people of color, and impoverished people synonymously. And I just wanted to highlight that and say, to me, that's the most important thing. We have to strive to break that connection. That has been one of my experiences in this town, living here for the last 10 years. So many people would just assume that I am working in this town, that I don't live here. So I just want to underscore what Victoria said, and just be mindful that there are affluent Black people in this town. So I think that's it for me. Thank you so much. Thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you, Hermine. I really appreciate that. And really an excellent idea that the notion that Chappaqua is poised to be a leader, and we like to win and we like to be leaders in a lot of areas. And why shouldn't this be one of the areas where we're an example for racial equity in our community? The administrative appointment is, an Office of Human Rights, Race, and Equity makes a lot of sense. It actually made me think about the work I had done in diversity at my company, where it first started with a grassroots organization of people of color who said, here are the ideas that need to be addressed, but there needs to be a person who becomes ultimately responsible for it and drives and is held accountable and holds people accountable for our initiatives. So I think that's a great idea, and that the CRE would roll up into that individual. And then finally, I did hear your point about just reminding ourselves that BIPOC doesn't necessarily mean economically challenged. And I'll take that a step further, which is we shouldn't really judge people based on their economic strength or weakness, right? We want people to be viewed as individuals, members of our community, regardless of what their income is or what their affluence is, what their race is, that everybody's treated with respect, no matter what area they're coming from, what economic space they're coming from, or racial or ethnic space they're coming from. So thank you for that, Hermine.
Okay, we have Jill Owens.
Yes, hi, good evening. I'm a member of this Group 8 Town Administration, and just really wanted to weigh in to piggyback on and echo some of the comments of Hermine, if I pronounced that correctly, and Geetha just now. So when I first moved here in 2009 as a single person with no children in the school, I had come from just before this in White Plains, where I had been very active civically and politically. And I tried to work into the board, which is very not the same board as now. So I'm not criticizing anyone, not criticizing anyone. But I found that it was that happened to be the city committee, the Democratic committee. But I found that it wasn't as welcoming as it had been where I had come from. So I think we need to work to get more people, diverse people, to be welcomed into civic activities in Chappaqua. And I think the idea that was just raised about sort of morphing this effort into a committee of the board, or to have some, members who work under a board member who are diverse, who can then sort of be in training to move into more active roles and powerful roles on the committee, I think would be important. I found that the folks I met had very much a bent towards aspirations of being on the school board, and it was very much education related, which is all very important. But I think we can use this opportunity and some of the voices that we're hearing on these last two nights to recruit to the town board and to other civic activities, because there are so many great ideas and important ideas for the moment that are being expressed.
Really excellent points, Jill, and I'm so glad you mentioned it because I think of it from time to time and then it slips my mind. But sometimes those of us who are bringing kids up through the system can always be thinking about Chappaqua in the context of parents with children who are going through the system, right? So we really need to extend our outreach to not solely talk about families with kids, but people who may be single or who may not have children, but who are also a part of this community and willing to serve. And I think we're really fortunate to have Ivy as the town supervisor and the board that's really invested in this. So now really is the time where we can look at things like creating board ready people, right? It's again a parallel to what happens in corporate America. Who are the people that we can recruit? Who are the people that we can attract and prepare for positions so they understand what it looks like, and then they can move into those roles, and we end up with a more diverse board. So thank you for those points, Jill.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have Victoria. Your line should be open now.
Okay, hi again. I don't want to take too much more time, but there are just 3 quick things that I wanted to put on the radar. One is the staffing piece. Our administrative staff downtown and town hall is wonderful. That said, it truly is, I don't want to, again, make too much of an overgeneralization. It's not, to the best of my recollection, the most ethnically, racially diverse group. And it almost makes me think of, as a former practicing attorney working in, big corporate law firms in the city, and how it wasn't always a successful effort, but trying to figure out a way to diversify the incoming associates and bringing in partners of color, and really, again, being intentional about recruiting efforts. Where is the town going to recruit? The same way there are, just to use an analogy to, African-American bar associations or folks of color bar associations that are networking opportunities and community building within those populations. Are we going to an analogous kind of professional organization where we might find, talent of folks of color? So just to be thoughtful about that in recruiting, and then really, again, using the law firm model, it's not just recruiting folks, but having them feel connected. I mean, similarly, it's not just having people move to Chappaqua, but wanting to stay in Chappaqua. And to the point earlier, send their kids to the schools here as opposed to sending them, to private schools. So a kind of a long-term planning around recruiting, best and brightest, folks of color to come and work here and be part of the working community and staying here, and where the culture shifts and evolves to be more inclusive. So that was one point. And then another point was, I was so struck by the experience of the students talking about current Greeley students and alumni at the school board meeting about how it felt to be a student at Greeley, and bias they felt against them and their experience around discrimination. And I just wonder, as we think about the town and the policies at the town, and how people feel to live here, and whether there's any feeling of disclusion from an administrative kind of level. Is there a way to do, and I'm very sensitive when I'm saying this, or wanting to be very sensitive about it. This is kind of an open meeting that we're having right now. Anyone can come, give their ideas, and it's great, and it's for the entire community. I wonder if there's a way to have some focus groups or opportunity to speak with BIPOC folks to talk among themselves about how their experience here has been, and share that up with the council around this piece and maybe other pieces, to really hear their voices and what could be shifted around leadership in the town, or experience in the town with the town administration. So I'm not sure how open you would be to that, but you often get different data and information when people are talking to each other who have similar experiences based on their identity. And then the third piece is the new law that's potentially coming up around the COVID social distancing and wearing masks. And this is a bit on my radar right now, because on the one hand, I think it's a wonderful idea. And I know, I'm a big mask wearer and social distancer, and I totally believe in that around the virus spreading and how to prevent it. And I also think, it's great that we may be the first town to do this. And at the other hand, we're dealing with, Black Lives Matter issues and the historic issues with the police, police departments around the nation, and the weightiness of the role of police and the discrimination against folks of color, especially, Black American folks, African American folks. So I'm sensitive to how that may be rolled out and any, kind of what that may look like externally, that we have, more of a police presence here around that, and fear that might be, unconscious fear of folks of color who are, studies show, et cetera. We all see it more vulnerable to being stopped and accused. And even, I'm sure many of us have seen the data around African-American folks wearing a mask, these masks, and feeling more vulnerable, that they're going to be accused of things. And, so I'm just very cognizant of the optics around that and wanting to roll that out in the most inclusive way, maybe having some African-American folks as the face of that effort, or just being sensitive to how that might be perceived, and, wanting it to do it in the most positive rollout sort of way and implementation.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. So I just want to make sure we've got the 3 points. The first being around staffing and acknowledging that the administrative staff in town is not as ethnically diverse as we might like to see. So we should be more intentional about our recruiting efforts. And something we may do, as we've come together as a BIPOC community, to really step into this time and solutions. It may be a matter of us sharing our own networks and our professional organizations with the town so that they know their places, like you said, Black Bar Association, other organizations where they might be able to recruit and find people and then have the inclusive culture that once they get here, they feel that they're that we can all work well together and they'll be accepted. Your second point about focus groups, to speak with BIPOC community members about town leadership and how they interact with the town, maybe in smaller sessions, because this is a public forum, but we will certainly take back to the town the possibility or idea of creating focus groups around this. And then I heard you on the third point about sort of the COVID situation, social distancing and wearing masks, and where that may create some discomfort or concern around people of color or Black people who might feel that that they might be targeted. So just making sure that as we roll that out, everybody feels comfortable and in that situation. And I hear you at how we manage that, how we do what's safe for everybody, both from a physical standpoint and from just feeling like they're comfortable in their community and their community knows them. So there's no reason to be concerned about wearing a mask, right?
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more in this category. So Ed, Frank, I'm going to open up your line.
Hi, just very briefly, talking about elected members. Our town board has 5 elected members, and also our town judge would be an elected person. I would suggest that this committee reach out.
Oh, sorry, Ed. Hang on one second. Okay, you should be, just unmute yourself again.
Oh, okay, very briefly. The members, the 5 members of the town board, the town judges are all elected members, and they're nominated by either the Democratic nominating committee of the town of Newcastle or the Republican nominating committee of the town of Newcastle. I suggest that this committee reach out to those 2 committees and suggest that BIPOC people be somebody who could be nominated. Thank you.
Fair. Thank you very much, Ed. So reaching out to the Democratic and Republican nominating committees to encourage BIPOC people to put on the nominating slates.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, back to you, Zabine.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? My computer in the middle of the session decided to start updating, so I'm now mobile. So we're going to move on to the last topic of the evening, which is communications. And communications is critical to any initiative, and certainly critical to the CRE and this council. So the mandate for the communications work group was to implement effective means of communicating, first within the community using inclusive and anti-racist language and ideals. Second, communicating externally about Newcastle's commitment to racial equity. And thirdly, generally communicating about CRE initiatives and accomplishments. So some questions we want to ask you to consider and would invite your feedback on as we roll out some of our communications planning within the town and beyond is, first, do you find our town newsletters and communications to be inclusive of our entire community, both in content and wording? So please let us know. Do you think that Chappaqua should make its BIPOC related history more visible around town? What would that look like? How would you prefer to be kept informed regarding the progress of the CRE initiative? So what channels? Would you be interested in helping to educate your neighbors about the CRE? And then lastly, what indicators will give you a sense that our community is making progress on the right path with the right changes? So I ask you please to have a think about these, and I open the floor to you all to share your ideas.
Okay, Andrea Morzuri, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name.
Maurizio. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Andrea.
I raised this yesterday privately with the panelists, but I thought, you know, I know that there's going to be an initiative to rename the high school. I think that it would be really valuable to create history markers that go up against the Greeley statue and the Greeley house that really speak to the true history of Horace Greeley. Obviously, we're not going to tear down the house. I don't know what we're going to do with the statue, but I think those would be really easy key initiatives that we could do in the next 6 months to really address it on a communication level. So that's my one suggestion.
Thank you, Andrea. And you also did share a link, I remember, of some benchmarks in other towns and case studies that did that successfully yesterday. And I did take a look, so we really, really appreciate it. I think it's a fantastic idea. History markers that talk about the true history, not just, you know, against the statue and the Greeley house, but maybe also around town. We talked a lot about paying homage to the indigenous tribes who own this land. I think that's certainly a viable and feasible immediate term actionable item. So thank you for bringing that up, Andrea.
Okay, Carlos, I'm going to open up your line.
Okay, mine seems to be open. Thank you. You can hear me okay?
Hi, Carlos. Yes. How are you?
I'm good. I'm actually a member of the community, of the communications group. And I've had, I think, some of my questions answered around what we're trying to get done. But I think it would be good if we as a community could actually engage more of the community in what we're trying to do. Obviously, I see that as part of a communications activity. For example, I love the idea, by the way, of the history markers. One of the fundamental questions I have is how much is the CRE representative of the true Chappaqua community, the full Chappaqua community, I should say. Clearly, those of us on this call have an interest in some form, but what about all those that are not on the call? So I wonder if we might possibly, as maybe a school project or something, leverage the schools to try and get a better sense of what people really think about racial equity here in Chappaqua, because I suspect we'll get a lot of different views, which I think is exactly what we want to learn and leverage. And so the reason I said is leverage the schools, because a comment was made earlier. Most of us made many of our connections to the community because our kids were either are or were in schools here. And that's an easy way to get a dialogue moving.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. And thank you so much, Carlos, for bringing that up, because, and this is something that we think about. Obviously, you, Carlos, and everybody that's here, we have a vested interest and a passion for this work. But how do we reach the people that maybe don't share that same passion or motivation? How do we reach out to them? And definitely making sure that we can engage the schools, engage organizations in and around town. And you're absolutely right. We need to engage everyone in the community. And that means even those that maybe aren't necessarily as interested in these racial equity or social justice type initiatives. Absolutely, we need more ideas and recommendations on how to effectively engage those audiences. So thank you very much, Carlos, for
I think a
bringing
way
that
to
up.
do that is to somehow make sure that students at all levels get some kind of an assignment or project or something that in essence forces them to go back home and ask these questions and learn from their own family and from their neighbors and so forth. And if we could collect that back, it gives us some of that broader 360 view.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, actually, because it makes it more personal and more relatable to your own environment and to your own ecosystem. Thank you very much, Carlos. I really appreciate it. Great ideas.
Okay, Lincoln Powell, I'm going to open up your line. Just unmute yourself.
I'm just following up to Carlos's mention about school and then going back home to do homework.
Lincoln, I'm struggling to hear you a little bit. If you could speak up a bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm just following up to Carlos's mention about school and homework in this scenario. What's interesting is when things started to happen a few weeks ago, I actually mentioned to one of the congressional candidates about a way to address the scenario. And like I said, good old civics. That used to be a course that was taught in school. And they should make it mandatory on a national level. And not only the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, but civil rights, human rights, and expand it. So you could possibly set it at a local level versus a national level, as I proposed. So, but yeah, I agree with Carlos.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lincoln. And I think absolutely, I do remember taking a civics course as well. And I think maybe exploring, how we can mandate learning around civil rights, human rights, and really mandate these kind of maybe uncomfortable conversations to be had in our own homes with our students to have with their families and their communities. I think it's very valuable and maybe more likely to get done when there's a grade at stake attached to it in Chappaqua, at least, right? So thank you so much, Lincoln. Thank you.
If anyone else is interested, just raise your digital hand.
And remember also your ideas on, the current newsletter. How do you want to get information about the CRE? Do you feel current town communications are inclusive? Just your feedback as we look to adapt and improve what we're already doing and maybe change it for the future.
Okay, Angela, your line should be open.
Hi.
Hi, Angela.
Hi, how are you? I just quick, I guess, addendum to what someone said earlier about history markers. There is actually one in Chappaqua for the African American Historical Trail of Westchester, and it's actually at the Friends House. Yeah, the Quaker Meeting House. And when I first came here, I just went by there once because I've always wanted to go to a friend's meeting. And I felt just very safe there because I knew that, during slavery, even though we're finding out that Horace Greeley wasn't, the most enlightened person around race, that enslaved people found a safe place there. And therefore, I would just kind of go hang out there sometimes with my son and things like that. So there is already something in the community, and maybe we can just expand on that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Angela. And I think, again, we oftentimes focus on so much of what we don't have that it's easy to forget that we do have some really great things in town. And even that this marker is there, perhaps it is something that we promote more, highlight more, and if other people can find comfort like you did, Angela, you know, that in itself is something that immediately we can have BIPOC, Black, and non-Black POC derive some comfort and safety. And so thank you so much for bringing that up to our attention.
Okay, Eric, your line should be open if you just unmute yourself.
Yes, good evening. I think
Hi,
I'm on.
Eric.
Good, how's it going?
You're good.
Awesome. Just real quick, in terms of the topic of trying to see how much buy-in we have from the community in general. I mean, obviously, we have a lot on this call right now. But between this call and the call yesterday too, this might have fell into a different category in terms of maybe more of like an educational perspective. But we talked about raising the level of education in schools and or perhaps using the library for that education around you know, people of color or African-American history. But I think it's also important too to raise the level of education of what white privilege means and to try to get an understanding of that. Because there's going to be, whether it's in this community or across the nation, it's going to be pushback. There's going to be individuals that don't feel, they don't want to feel guilty and they don't understand what white privilege is. So I think that's an unmet need. And I really believe that we need to get as much as, we're not going to get the whole community. You're never going to get that, but try to get more of it involved in what's right. And so I think that's an unmet need. I'm not quite sure how to execute on that yet, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing that up and being so candid about it, because those are one of the very sticky topics that certainly Black and non-Black POC and BIPOC communities are constantly having to educate you know, the white community about, you know, what is white privilege and, you know, what does it really mean? And then there are questions and discussions around white guilt and what is white guilt. And I think this is, I think what you're highlighting is absolutely correct, that we need to have some fundamental learning blocks laid down, plant some basic seeds, you know, and Angela, who just spoke before you and is lead for communications, she said this quite eloquently to me and Michelle a few days ago, that, you know, everybody's starting at a different place and we want to make sure that everybody at least is on the same page about where we're going and how we're getting there. And that means maybe from the beginning, defining some of these terms. And Angela and her team is working on this handbook with terms and glossaries and guidelines to really help support that initiative. So thank you very much, Eric, for bringing that up. And you're right, we're never going to get universal buy-in, but we have to try to get as much buy-in as possible.
Okay, we have another comment from Brian Watson.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Brian.
Maybe to build on this, so one of the prompt questions I heard was like, what are the markers to know that we're making progress? And one of the things I've stumbled upon in my own journey is around this word anti-racist. And I'll be frank, I just didn't quite know what it meant. But in doing some research, you start to see anti-racist. It's a journey from living in fear to learning to growth. And so I think that's a great idea around. The fear piece I see is either denying there's a problem, or the second of I don't have the vocabulary to have a conversation on race. And so I think it's great to hear that there's this say glossary, so we can at least know what are the right words. We're not going to all use them the right way. So to this point of like where we are in this journey, one is like your own individual assessment of, are you in fear? Are you in learning and growth? And maybe we start to ask ourselves as a community where we are on that journey. And so that's just one idea around measuring progress.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. And some of the things that we are considering is doing different polls, surveys, and Angela's been leading that charge, and she's been doing an amazing job in ideating some of these things. And we do want to kind of get a gauge on where people stand on their different comfort levels. And as you mentioned, where are you in terms of fear and learning? And how we can really help you and create an environment that you feel safe to learn as well, right? Because we want to learn, we want you to learn, and we want to help you to learn as well. So Brian, thank you so much for bringing that up. And I know, Carrie, we're reaching the end of our hour. I don't know what the time stamp is, Carrie.
Yes, it's just about 8 o'clock.
Okay. So I will then, do we have anyone else, Carrie? Or I think we have to wrap up now, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. For those of you that have questions and weren't able to ask, please email them to Ivy, because I had this fancy slide ready, but now that my computer has died and I'm on my phone, I can't put it up, but it's ipool@mynewcastle.org. Ivy, sorry to throw you under the bus for that, but please send them. We do want to hear your suggestions. Send your links, send your ideas. We got so many yesterday, and we anticipate getting so much more, and we are so happy to have all of you. We are exploring the idea of how we can have more listening sessions to keep more of you engaged and include more of the community to get them engaged. And this has been so productive. You guys have been so amazing with your ideas and your contributions, and we want to keep the dialogue open. So from my side, thank you, and good night. And Nichelle, Ivy, I leave you to make your closing remarks.
Yeah, no, I reiterate all of Sabine's remarks. It's really been a great experience, and I think we're off to a great start. Thank you, everyone, for your time and for your attention and for your passion about this subject.
I'll just reiterate, thank you to everybody for joining us on this listening session. For those of you who were on last night as well, 2 very intense but very productive nights. In my opinion, I have learned a tremendous amount from listening to all of you, and I really appreciate you're taking the time to educate me and to be a part of this work. Thank you. I also want to say a special thank you to Carrie Krams, the Executive Director of Newcastle Community Media Center, and Lyle Anderson, who's the President of the board there, for producing these videos, which we will make the links available via YouTube after this call for people to refer to and go back to. So thank you for your time. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank Nichelle and Sabine for their outstanding work, both organizing tonight and facilitating this meeting, as well as all of the work that is going on behind the scenes to lead a council of 90+ people, which is a difficult task. But if I've ever met 2 people who were really and truly up for a challenge, it's Nichelle and Sabine. So thank you both for being co-chairs and for being the leaders of this work in this community. We truly could not be doing this without you. So thank you. And with that said, thank you all again for joining us, and we look forward to continuing this work.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.